Party people in the house, welcome to Matt Sherrill's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
And what you hear is not a test. We are rapping about hip-hop today. It is 1981, and a song comes out early in that year that brings hip-hop to the masses, although the genre itself wouldn't break through worldwide for a couple of years yet. 1981, a big year for the emerging hip-hop genre. And we've got a couple of experts, friends of mine in here to help us out today. Mark Daniels, my former KUIK radio colleague who's been rocking the house at dances and functions all over the Northwest for a couple of decades, is DJ Avalanche, the proprietor of Bridge City Music, now spending a lot of his time in music education with Portland youth. And my current on-air partner at Portland State University Vikings men's basketball broadcasts on ESPN+. My former partner at Pacific University is also the voice of Boxers men's and women's basketball, the analyst of the Remix, the Portland Blazers G League team, Devon Pouncey. And these two guys are I'm going to have to get you guys individually to list everything you're into. The epitome of hustle, these two. I cannot keep up. So, Mark, talk about what you're doing with young folks these days.
Right now, I'm working at a place called Bach to Rock. I'm actually in charge of the DJ division, and it's actually called the Beat Refinery. And that's where I get an opportunity to share with people of all ages what we do as DJs, teach them how to do it, everything from the very, very basics to more complex things. Level 1 just teaches you how to get around equipment, picking music. Level 2, we start getting into mixing. Level 3, I start working on your identity. Who are you? What separates you from the rest of us? What is your style? What is the things that you can do to a song to kind of make it feel a little bit different if I played the same song that you played, So kind of getting into that. And so I've got some good young people there, man. And obviously, as you mentioned, I have my mobile DJ company and I have a photo booth company. Still do radio. I got mix shows in Brooklyn, New York on iHeart stations out there. Used to be on Sprint Radio. Working with the Remix now, helping them. Just kind of, we could probably do this for another hour or two if we wanted to. But that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, my man Pounce is getting busy too. Now we're going to lose you in a couple hours. You're heading up north for your day job with. Tell us about Street Roots.
Yeah, so Street Roots is a newspaper that is essentially a low barrier income opportunity for folks that are out living on the streets, that are unhoused or impoverished. And the coverage is more social justice based, but it's all primarily investigative reporting and some publishing of vendors as well, which are the folks that actually go out and sell the newspaper. I'm kind of in transition. I was the director of the vendor program there for 5 years, and now I'm actually switching, and I'll become the community media director, where I'll basically we'll be partnering with other nonprofits and educators and things that are like to be able to help create a curriculum for folks that are unhoused to be able to learn how to publish media, essentially. So really excited about that. Because that's just more of my wheelhouse, although I loved, the position that I had as a vendor program director. And I still get to do a lot of journalism stuff there as well, because we are primarily a journalism organization, which is what I went to school for. So that's just Street Roots stuff.
You also got your own podcast?
I do. Podcast is called Wake Up and Win with Devon Pouncey. It's more of an intersectional podcast. My three worlds are basically sports, politics, and then just, like urban culture, essentially, whether it be music, whether it be, film, the arts, if you will. And so it's just kind of a place where I do things in all three of these different worlds separately. And my podcast is the place where I can kind of allow all those worlds to collide and bring them all together and give kind of interesting perspectives based on what it is that I do and what it is that I've been around and been exposed to in all three of those different worlds that do all have some intersections. So, it's a good for me. It's kind of more therapeutic, my podcast, because I do so many different things, as you kind of talked about, Matt. And that's the place where I could just bring it all together and almost like have a brain dump every week, and it kind of allows me to release some of that stuff and then get back to work in all of these facets that I work in.
Well, Pounce also contributes to urban culture, getting out there and spending it in local Portland clubs as well. So both these guys have skills in that department and know their hip hop music frontwards and backwards. So we're happy they're lending their expertise to today's discussion. But my first exposure to the rap genre, hip hop genre, was via a single released by Blondie in January of 1981 called Rapture. This would be their second straight #1 single off the Auto American LP released in 1980. The first single was The Tide is High. It was a reggae cover of a song by the Paragons, pretty much a straight reggae song. That hit #1. And then Rapture comes out in January. And so many people maybe think, well, wait a minute now. You'd never heard Rapper's Delight? That came out in 79. That was the first hip-hop recording, professionally released record on Sugar Hill Records. Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang came out in late 1979. It was something of a phenomenon. It actually reached the Billboard Top 40. But Cheryl, maybe you can attest to this too. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, not exactly the most diverse market in the United States, I think it's safe to say.
No.
That song did not get airplay. I don't recall ever hearing it or hearing about it, hearing other kids talking about it. So that would have been 79. No. That would have been the beginning of the 79-80 school year. So that would have been 5th grade, I guess, for me. And that completely went, I don't remember anything about it from the time.
Well, I was in like 4th grade, and I was just still listening to my mom's Neil Diamond albums at that time. So at the time, I certainly didn't know of that. And even later, I would say that definitely Rapture would have been the first thing I'd heard too that was in the rap vein, and mostly because of MTV.
Yeah, we've talked about, hit records and radio before. A song could be massive in one market, and people in that market might think it was a big hit, and only to find later on that it wasn't, because it didn't get play in these other markets. So while Rapper's Delight might have gotten lots of radio play in, the tri-state area or LA or other urban markets with a bigger black population, I don't think Seattle and Portland radio picked up on it at all, at least not the top 40 stations. Now, Mark, you're part of our cohort, Generation X. Where were you? How old were you, and where were you living in 1979? And what do you remember about Rapper's Delight?
Oh, man, that was everything. First of all, I was born in 70, so I was 9 years old when it came out. And our family's originally from Illinois. And in the area of Illinois that we grew up in, it's mid-state. So you had the combination of Chicago stations and the St. Louis stations. So very, very urban, very much. You had, to this day, WGCI is still one of the biggest stations in Chicago. But then on the other end, we had St. Louis stations. We had one called Magic 108 was the big one. So for anybody that's listening that knows the area, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
There was a Magic 108 in Seattle in the 80s, too, and it was about as far from urban as you could get.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Magic 108 was like a big station. It has since changed to another name, but it's still urban. And they used to have a Z100 there in St. Louis as well, which was really groundbreaking. They used to do a thing called the roll call. So what they would do is they would take these beats that had come out that were really, really big, and then a DJ would come on and say, "Hey, it's DJ Avalanche live on the roll call, blah, blah, blah. We've got 4 rappers coming up on the phone. Let me introduce, MC Pounce. Go." And then they play the beat, the instrumental, and then you would just rap over it. So our culture was very, very different in that area. We did some things that still to this day aren't as big. You're finally seeing people like LA Leakers and from the Bay Area, Sway Show.
Yeah.
These guys are doing these freestyles and stuff that in our area were being done in 80. So we got Rapper's Delight when it first came out. We got all these really niche type things that came out, like when you had the Rappin' Duke and all that, which was not aired everywhere. we got all that stuff. You know what I mean? A lot of crazy songs that people wouldn't even know about. Like there was one that came up a little earlier called "Put the Boogie in Your Body," but there was the one called "Put the Boogie in Your Butt." I don't know if anybody would remember that, but
Yes.
yeah, it was like an Eddie Murphy thing,
Right,
but
yeah.
whatever. You know, we had Bobby Jimmy and the Crickets and things like that people just had no clue about, back at that time frame. So we got a lot of stuff. It was very urban in that area.
Well, now the interesting thing about hip hop this now in this past year, 2023, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of hip hop. Well, it's not until 79 that a actual hip hop record gets released. So there is a long period of time where hip hop is this completely underground phenomenon. It's essentially contained in one borough in New York City, the Bronx, where it's a live art form. The only way you get exposed to it is by going to these house parties, these block parties. And then this record finally comes out in 79. Now, I kind of agonized about us not putting Rapper's Delight on our playlist for 79. But in researching this episode, one of the many things that I've learned is that there was a lot of backlash in the hip hop community when that song came out. It was perceived as exploitative. The performers were seen as somewhat fraudulent, that they weren't really truly part of that scene.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's a great record. It's still a great record. Yeah.
It's a great record. One of the most notorious records in history. And it will continue to be. Everyone recognizes that groove, even though it came from Chic, but they really took that to another level and opened doors in a way that just had never been done before. You know what I mean? And there were people that were in other areas. You had Cold Crush Brothers that were active before. They just didn't get an opportunity to record. There were other groups out there, obviously Kool Herc being the godfather of this whole art form with throwing the parties and this and that. A lot of this stuff evolved from people being at parties, and then you had an MC that would host and just say, hey, welcome to my party. I'm glad that, y'all came here instead of to that other one on the other side of town that's whack, and then they started adding the poetry to it. So going back to 73, rap really started way back then. Just no one really had access until Sylvia Robinson, if anybody knows who that is, from Mick and Sylvia fame. And, now you start to dig into rap history, and really, even though 79, the roots of it, you can take all the way back to the 50s. You can go back to 59 when she first came out. If it wasn't for that money and her exposure and knowledge and everything in the industry, she wouldn't have given the opportunity to this culture that she started seeing in her neighborhood. It took a little convincing. And by the way, I don't want to leave out her husband, Joe, but, Joe and Sylvia launched this, and, they started seeing it in the urban neighborhoods because a lot of the poor neighborhoods didn't have anything. So, when the Technique turntables came out and people started getting a hold of them, and they were like, look, we got nothing to do. Let's bring these outside with the speakers and create a little party in the courtyard, and then it turned into, let's charge a quarter and 50 cents. It goes up to $1, and it just, everything elevated from there. So the culture is really exciting, and there's a lot behind it. But yeah, there's, you really can't honestly say who did what first. We just know that the first recorded one was Sugar Hill Gang, and so for any other group that's on any other side of town, they might have felt like, oh, they didn't do it first. We did it first. And ours is more real than theirs is. You still get that to this day.
No, and I was going to say, it's a fun debate about what really is the first rap record, because there are things that predate Rapper's Delight. Now,
absolutely,
there's this wonderful documentary series on Netflix called Hip Hop Evolution, and they do a great job of getting to the source, talking to the original, characters from that era, including Kool Herc. Now, Kool Herc is cited as it's the genesis of hip hop. He's got this great sound system that's louder than everybody else's, but what he's doing is working two turntables, isolating the breakdown section of a popular song that really gets the dance floor moving, and switching back and forth between the two records to extend that break section. So he's kind of seen as the pioneer that got the ball rolling, and they kind of placed ground zero, I think, August of '73 at a party he threw in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
But and I've heard this record referenced before, but I'd never heard it. And now I'm kind of convinced that Pigmeat Markham might have been the first rap with Here Come the Judge in 1978. I mean, I listened to that. I'm hearing rap.
Yeah.
And it's like a comedy. It's like a comedy album, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a comedy. It's kind of a funk track. Yeah. It's kind of a novelty number, but I mean, it's funky as hell. And he is rapping. I mean, he's flowing over this real funky groove.
Yeah.
And it's old, dude.
And I would, I would agree with that. I mean, well, again, let's go back to what you brought up earlier about, Blondie and Rapture. People started seeing what was happening in the communities and, started saying, man, this thing is interesting, because if you listen to it, especially being not only a DJ, but a producer, I've got records out there and one of which I got to thank you, Matt, because he gave me a challenge on, using a record, and we actually did put it out. So it's actually called Love Funk. If you look it up online under Il Knob and DJ Avalanche, it's called Love Funk. But that was actually thanks to you, Matt. But I led into that to say that when people speak about flows, as a producer, I see flows differently. A lot of people use that term very loosely. But when you start talking about flows, you're talking about a person's lyricism. You're talking about their cadence, the way that they ride a beat. Those three elements in a flow is very important. So when you go back to this, comedic situation or Blondie and Rapture, people started understanding this flow was very rhythmic, and it was like any other instrument. And it was intriguing to people, especially musicians, but you can take this really and go all the way back to the days of scat. I mean, that truly is the early days of rap, because that's where you started to hear the rhythmic parts of it, the true cadence and flows and different things like that.
Like Cab Calloway.
Absolutely.
Then you've got James Brown's concept of funk, where every element of a track, including the vocal, is considered to be percussion, considered to be part of the rhythm element. And that's
absolutely
really essential to hip hop.
Absolutely. And in fact, all of our terminology references a lot of things like that. When, you'll hear someone say, oh, that was out of pocket. That goes back to jazz times, where the jazz players would say, keep this song tight, keep it in the pocket. And then it evolved from there. And, slang terms are slang terms. They start in one spot and end up somewhere else. But, you can see all the influences coming from the early days, whether it's rap itself or the verbiage. So, yeah. So
we've got DJ Avalanche here and Devon Pouncey. We're talking hip-hop music, 1981, some of the roots of hip-hop. And so when Herc starts playing these house parties, it's 1973, and disco is emerging at this point as a popular art form, music form. But it's disco is kind of aspirational. It's especially the kind of music that's coming out then, which is mainly out of Philadelphia, Philly International, Gamble and Huff Productions. It is their concept was to take R&B and make it more glamorous, more uptown. So discos were kind of exclusive. People dressed up to go out to these, disco clubs and dance. Now, what's happening with Herc and in the Bronx is everything is way grittier, way more street level. And instead of playing these slick disco records, he's going back a few years and playing hard funk music. But part of that mix is Sly and the Family Stone, and our pal Pounce here, we haven't mentioned yet, is a native of Vallejo and is related to the Stewart family. They're cousins, right?
Yes, definitely. Funny story about that. If you kind of dig into the history of Sly and the Family Stone in particular, they were very rooted in church, particularly Kojic, Church of God in Christ, which is what my family still is. I mean, Freddie Stewart, who's the brother of Sly and was a bass player in the band, is a pastor now. He's kind of, turned his life around back in our hometown of Vallejo, California, of a Kojic church. But my grandmother, who was first cousins with Sylvester which was Sly, of course, and Freddie and all of them. Um, she was a pianist, and my great grandfather was a pastor of a Kojic church that they all grew up in Vallejo, California. And because my grandmother was the PK, if you will, she was the preacher's kid. When Freddie and Sly and them decided to create this band together, which ultimately became Sly and the Family Stone, my grandmother was actually supposed to be a part of the band, but her father would not allow her to like play in the band because they were going more secular, if you will. And again, of course, not knowing that the band would ultimately become Sly and the Family Stone, one of the most influential funk fusion bands of all time. So for me, I'm born in 1993, so I'm sitting here soaking up all of this game that y'all are sitting here dishing out about the 70s. But I do have a little bit of a connection to that area, a familial connection, where I've been able to get and hear some pretty cool stories about back in that time period, and ultimately how it's influenced music of today.
Well, part of a big part of what we're doing on this show is certainly in this part of it, it's a timeline, Generation X, and we're starting at the very beginning with earliest musical memories. So, Pounce, let's go back in your early formative years. What's the first music you remember hearing and connecting with as a child?
Well, I mean, when it comes to hip hop in particular, since this is kind of dedicated to the earlier days of hip hop, I'm a West Coast kid. Again, growing up in Vallejo, California, dad was a big Too Short guy, which is, early 80s, Freaky Tales, which I was probably way too young to be listening to, but it was what it was. That sort of out the trunk, independent, vulgar, explicit music that the West Coast was known for back in those days. I remember the earlier days of my childhood and how big of a Too Short fan my dad was. And then also growing up in Vallejo, I told this story on my podcast. Well, I didn't tell a story, but, as we were kind of talking about Hip Hop 50 and all those things, and I took the question from the great hip hop movie Brown Sugar, which was, what is the moment that you first fell in love with hip hop? And for me, I was born in 1993. In 1998, E40 had an album called Charlie Hustle that came out. And we had a park, still very well known park in Vallejo called Dan Foley Park, right behind our Six Flags, used to be called Marine World, now Discovery Kingdom. And E40 basically just threw a huge picnic at this park. And I mean, he had people of the likes of Gary Payton, who was actually his neighbor back then. When he was on the Supersonics, they stayed out in the Black Hawk area. Charles Woodson obviously was the Oakland Raiders. He had the mascot Thunder out there from the Golden State Warriors. And this is in '98, he created a DVD as well, and had a scene, of course, from that party or whatever, that block party, picnic, if whatever it is you want to call it. And I had a little cameo in that DVD, that independent DVD that E40 made that was in collaboration with the Charlie Hustle album. So I really grew up around that real West Coast, independent, out the trunk model of hip hop. And, those were Pop's prime years. So I'm just soaking it all in as a young pup. And, those are times that I remember vividly that certainly have stayed with me till this day.
Wow.
Well, Mark, let's go back to your early years now. So would Rapper's Delight would that have been your initiation into, were you aware of rap music as an art form before that came out? Or
I think that truly was for most of us, because it everything was rooted in New York. So unless you were in that vicinity, it was really hard to hear anything. So getting Sugar Hill on a major platform made it to where we all understood at that point in time, oh, this is a thing. This is real. What is this? So yeah, definitely. Now, one of the things, first of all, I gotta give a shout out to Pounce for the roots, man. Your roots are crazy. I couldn't imagine growing up in the Bay with Sprinkle Me and all that going on. And that's crazy.
It was a wild time.
Yeah. And then, of course, the dance of the music, man, that breakdown is probably one of the best breakdowns ever in history.
Agreed.
So, yeah. But what I wanted to mention was, when you brought up if that was my first time with rap, Yes, but at that same time, disco also evolved something that no one else was involved in. No one else cared except for those of us in Illinois, and that was house
Right.
music, which is an extension of disco. So what you had, disco was birthing at the same time, house music and rap music all at the same time, and it was a pretty interesting time because you were hearing certain things that were like it was kind of like this hybrid. Like some things were just straightforward house music, which people hated because it was very repetitive, and then you had rap. But then you have people like Steve Silk Hurley, that came out with Jack, Jack to Jack to Jack Your Body. So now you've got this vocal over a house music track that's very rappy, because it was all at the same time. So I was aware of all of that. In fact, in my garage, I've had people try to explain to me where house music originated from. I'm like, don't do that. I'm from the home. Don't do that. I still have a cassette tape from 1984 of a radio station in Chicago that was the only 24-hour house music station called WBMX. And we used to sit around and record off the radio, and the things that you would hear back then was incredible. And one of those artists, if you can believe it or not, was from the Pacific Northwest, and that was Sir Mix-a-Lot. They actually dropped Square Dance Rap. I don't know if anybody's familiar with, Yeah. So, we were getting stuff like that all at the same time because of where we were positioned at. When you start talking about the Chicago area, it's very soulful. So, you're getting a lot of really urban soulful records, and then this emergence comes out of house and then hip hop. So for me, it was all happening at the same time. We were getting it at the same time.
So the genre is kind of building up starting in the early 70s with these house parties, these block parties, and they're becoming more and more popular. We're still kind of focused on the Bronx, making its way to some other parts of New York City. But after Rapper's Delight hits in 79, now you've got people jumping into the game, independent labels popping up, signing artists, looking for hip hop talent. So that's starting to happen. 1980, Curtis Blow comes out with The Breaks, which is a big, landmark hip hop track that sold quite a bit independently. But a major development here is the music kind of moving from uptown New York to downtown, where this alliance starts to form with this downtown kind of artsy bohemian scene. And Fab Five Freddy, who is referenced in the song Rapture in Debbie Harry's rap, he's kind of the connection that makes this all happen. He's an artist, and he starts to connect these hip hop folks with these, downtown punk rockers and artists, and they start to play Manhattan clubs, and then word starts to spread from there. Blondie, they come out of this New York punk scene, kind of an artsy scene with a lot of these bands, Blondie, Talking Heads, and the like, and she and her husband Chris Stein, I don't know if they're married at the time. They're a couple. They're very adventurous, and they're very into these art scenes. And early on they're going out and checking out these hip hop parties in the Bronx, and they decide to work it into this single Rapture. Now it's not a straight rap track, but there are rap elements in it. And this thing becomes a monster. Now, Blondie at this time, now they've come out of this New York art scene, this punk scene, but at this time, 1980 and 81, they're one of the biggest bands in the world. I mean, they hit it big with Parallel Lines, Heart of Glass. Their Dalliance with Disco is a massive hit, one of the biggest hits of the year that year. So they're kind of on top of the world. And for kids like us, this is really our first exposure to any element of this culture is through this song. I don't know at the time as a 10, 11-year-old that I had any concept of what rap was or what she's talking about when she's referencing Fab Five Freddy and Flash and all this stuff. I just knew it was cool. And me and my friend Randy would be riding our bikes, and we'd be spitting that whole rhyme as we're riding around Chehalis. It was just one of the coolest things I'd ever heard. But it would be several years before the doors would really swing open to this hip hop world for me. But this is the first taste for a lot of us. Cheryl, what do you remember about Rapture? Did you dig that when it came out, or were you aware of it?
Yeah, I did. But like I said, it was more after seeing the video on MTV.
It's a great track. It is loaded with hooks. That the funky guitar, ding it, ding it, ding ding, the chimes. I love the guitar solo. Very much of the age with the effects on the guitar, and then you've got Tom Scott, who is a world famous sax player, plays the saxophone on that track as well. And actually, even before Rapture comes out, the Clash on Sandinista, which came out in 1980, they're dipping into that scene.
Yeah, Magnificent Seven and Lightning Strikes is also a rap song on that album. And they were doing the same thing that Debbie Harry and Chris Stein were doing. They were going out and in New York and hearing this music. And so they were influenced by, and Mick Jones was really into dub, and he was always like carrying the boombox around with him. And that's kind of become some of their imagery, like on their albums, they have a box set that is actually shaped like a boombox.
Right. At the time, what they called, I guess the term is no longer politically correct, but they called those radios ghetto blasters back in the day.
Yes, they did.
For sure. Yeah, we did. It's funny, going back to your question about being aware of rap. Again, I was there at the beginning, but I will say that I think there were two that were very, very impactful for rap. The Breaks, which you mentioned, by Curtis Blow. Curtis Blow's history, and kind of, you do that 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. You can kind of do something similar with Curtis Blow, because ultimately, Curtis Blow had Run from Run DMC as his DJ. That's where Run started. So when you hear in certain raps, and he says DJ Run, that's why, because he was a DJ for Curtis Blow first, before him and Daryl DMC ended up joining with Jay, and then going from there to create, Run DMC, which was managed by his older brother, Russell Simmons, who ultimately got them signed to Profile, and then he went on to start Def Jam, and then he wouldn't have started Def Jam if it wasn't for what he was able to accomplish, he and Rick Rubin, with them. So when you kind of break it down, there's a lot of roots there. So I think that Curtis Blow is impactful for that reason, especially being an early person to release a record. The other one for me personally that hit me on a personal level was The Message, 1982.
Right.
Just hearing how the groove was great, but how eloquently they could speak about what was going on in their neighborhoods that people didn't know about, you know what I mean? And turning that into a rhyme form and just helping you to just get a quick glimpse of what was going on in these spaces. I felt like, especially even today as a writer, it's like I look at that and I go, man, to convey your thoughts and emotions and feelings and your surroundings and what's truly going on and make that resonate with others, that was big. That was really, really big.
Before that, maybe Stevie Wonder, Living in the City, might have been an example of that kind of.
Absolutely. I mean, and we have several. I mean, we can go back with What's Going On.
Yeah.
Different. I mean, there was a lot of different songs that in the Black community that spoke about these types of things. But when it came to rap, think about the very first one, I got a such and such TV on my wall so I can watch the Knicks play back.
Yeah, it's all like party time, and this is actually getting down to real life.
Yeah.
And actually, Melly Mel actually cited Living in the City as his inspiration to write the lyric to The Message.
Right. And that's the important thing about rap. I remember hearing so many people say, I remember back in the 80s, rap is crap. They steal songs and this and that. When in actuality, rap is like a ongoing conversation in your community. And what I mean by that is something can happen and everyone knows where it started. It's not stealing. It's a point of reference. Like if I say a word, I don't have to explain myself because you know what that means. You know where that reference came from, and everything is a reference point. So a lot of times in urban culture, someone will say a word that you've probably never heard for the first time, but because we've all been in tune, we get it. And that's how it was musically. When you have something like The Message, that influence clearly came from living in the city or other things of that time frame. That's just how everything was. And those things even had things that influenced them, and it keeps going back and going back. So everything is a spider web, if you will. Outside of black radio, rap wasn't being heard. And in fact,
here's an important point to make too. A lot of black radio shunned it. A lot of black radio shunned rap music.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to bring that up because I moved here in 1990. And my first radio job coming from Colorado was for what used to be KUPL, country station. And being the hip hop and urban music fan that I am, I love country, don't get it confused. But I was like, man, I really want to be involved. So I went and worked at what was KBMS, 1480 on AM. And that was the only urban station that you had that was 24 hours. And let me tell you, Miss Angela Jenkins was the program director. She wasn't having rap. She was like, I don't like this. And she was a lot like a lot of other program directors, just like Matt said. It was definitely shunned. People didn't like it. They didn't like a lot about it, And as a result of that, me being the young gun that came in, I kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and they finally gave me a rap show on there. I also had a countdown show, and I was the first person in Portland to break Tupac's Brenda's Got a Baby, because the record label came in and said, hey, we want you to break this record. She goes, I got the perfect guy. And they brought me the vinyl, and I was like, yo, what? And this was like shortly after Digital Underground had done the same song, and we heard his verse, and it was like, oh my God, this dude's amazing. Yeah. So I say that to say Matt is 100% correct. Urban music even shunned it. But even furthermore, if you go back and check the history, the stations that could play rap, you couldn't play rap before 7 p.m. on most stations. That was a thing. And people now hearing that are like, what? It was just the way it was. Yeah. You couldn't play, even on this station. Yeah. When Angela let me play certain things, it was really kind of tough to get them on early on a Saturday morning because they wouldn't let you play it until after 7.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Just kind of hearing about all of this, and then also like referring back to my childhood again. I was born in the early 90s, and I feel like I just kind of got straight into it. Back to as much as I can remember of my childhood, but in the West Coast, more so California in particular, I think the artists there just kind of basically just said F radio all the way and decided to get as vulgar and as street and as just nasty as they possibly could with the records, because they knew that radio wasn't going to fool with it anyway. So we might as well get all the way X-rated with this music. And then like growing up for me and Vallejo, like one of the hit records back in the 90s was can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Okay, it was Too Hard for the Fucking Radio by Mac Dre, which was released in 1989, but was like a staple of my childhood and kind of really spoke to that sort of out the trunk lifestyle that many of the folks, especially in the Bay Area, like lived by when it came to that independent hustle. But that was one of those first songs for me that made me realize that, oh, this music isn't really getting played on radio, but you can go stop on every street corner and go get, a parental advisory CD, whether it be a bootleg or somebody pressed up, however many thousands of CDs, and they're just slanging them out the back of the trunk. And so, the lifestyle out there was just so different that we kind of, as you mentioned, kind of black radio shunned hip hop. We kind of shunned black radio as well in a lot of ways by just creating a completely different independent model.
There's a really ironic element to this too, when and they again this hip hop evolution series, really well done, but they talk about the influences on MC style, where the the MCs got their flow from, and a lot of it was from these black radio DJs, and a lot of these black radio DJs, the most prominent maybe being Frankie Crocker in New York, wanted nothing to do with hip hop at all, But a lot of MCs were influenced by these DJs and their flow on the air, their rap on the air.
And that's very true, because there's just like how the party started. When people would hear the groove, they would say something poetic in a kind of a smooth way to kind of flow with the song. That's really where a lot of it originated from, whether you're on radio or not. You know, you get a lot of people that come on like, hey, this is WKEI, you know, whatever. And we're in the groove with such and such. And, you know, it really was all, you know, this whole ball that was just, you know, coming loose and evolving and breaking off in all these different parts. You know, so the influence came from a lot of places. And yes, radio was really, really big. In fact, when you start talking about radio DJs, it's kind of unfortunate that radio has become what it's become, because when you go back to the early days of radio, the radio DJs were as much the stars as the musicians. In fact, the musicians would have to go to the DJs, pay a little bit of money to be able to get them to co-sign their songs, because in those communities, the DJ was actually the star. So they would say, all right, Detroit, or, you know, San Francisco or whatever, you know, lend your ear to this new group. They're hot. I'm co-signing it. And everyone would listen. And then all of a sudden they would have a following based on what that DJ recommended. So yeah, a lot of the influence came from the DJs first.
And in the early days of hip hop, the DJ truly was the star. You referenced Cold Crush Brothers, never really effectively recorded, and a lot before Rapper's Delight came out. And even in those first couple of years when rap records started coming out, a lot of the serious hip hop connoisseurs were getting their music via bootleg tapes. And a lot of these recordings never made it into official releases. Let's also go back. I want to, you referenced dub. I mean, the Jamaican influence is very important in early hip hop. Kool Herc was a Jamaican. He was born in Jamaica. He was an immigrant. Clive Campbell was his real name. But you had these sound systems in Jamaica where, again, to hear live music, you had to go to clubs and venues, and it was, you know, out of the reach of a lot of the poor people in the country. And a lot of them got their music from these sound systems, these DJs playing records, and then they would alter the sound using effects. And you had toasting, which was the kind of the before MCs, guys like U-Roy and Big Youth in Jamaica getting on the mic and just kind of adding to this spacey mix. Also, dub is becoming very influential in the punk new wave community at the turn of the 80s. And you start to see that influence on groups like The Police and XTC. So that's kind of, again, creating the link that brought hip-hop into this downtown New York art world. Now, going back to The Message, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, 1982. That's really the first rap track that's not party lyrics. It's the first one taking on serious themes, darker subject matter. Before that, it was pretty much all party music. But the year before The Message comes out, I think Grandmaster Flash and the Furious, their first record was Super Rappin', I think. Came out in late 79, early 80. But Flash had been on the scene for a long time. Now, he's taking Herc's innovation of using the two records, and he's taking it up another level. He sees, well, okay, there's got to be a way to do this better and make it cleaner and smoother. And so this is where you get the manipulation of the records in a different way. Instead of moving the tone arm back to the beginning of the break, he's spinning the record back, actually putting his hands on the record, which is, you know, any DJ at this time, that's a no-no. You don't touch the vinyl. And one of the things I loved in this hip hop,
we do.
This hip hop evolution series. I love listening to Grandmaster Flash talk. I mean, he's a very riveting speaker. Yeah. But when he first starts doing this, he thinks, "Oh my God, this is this amazing development. I'm going to rock these parties." And he first starts showcasing his new skills, and it doesn't work out the way he wants, because instead of everybody going crazy, they're all like crowding up to the DJ booth. I said, "What is he doing?" And it's just distracting everybody. So that's kind of how the Furious Five gets together, because he figures, okay, you get these MCs, these guys working the microphones, it's going to distract everybody's attention from what I'm doing, and then they'll just be into the thing as a whole. So he assembles the Furious Five. But before The Message comes out, they put out The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash and the Wheels of Steel in 1981. And even listening to this today, it just sounds so cutting edge. I mean, it's hard to think back to this era when people are unaware of this developing art form and what this must have sounded like when people first, this is the beginning of turntablism.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, what's funny about that is when I teach, I go back and explain how things started in the Bronx with Cool Herc and Africa Bambaataa and that whole group of DJs and the different camps and this and that. But explaining to them that rap was based off of the breakdowns and them, like you were explaining, Matt, utilizing that one on one side of the turntable, the other on the other side, and you're having to extend this instrumental section, this break, to create space so that the MC could talk over it and then eventually rap over it. We now call that beat juggling. So it now has a name. So I practice beat juggling almost every day, but that was the original loop. That was how you would loop a song. And it really was. It was an incredible thing that people were not ready for. And, even in the process of that, when you start talking about doing this beat juggle or, using the breaks, I had the pleasure last year of meeting and spending time with Grand Wizard Theodore, who at that time was a 12-year-old kid. He was trying to do the same thing. And by trying to get his timing right, he discovered the scratch. And, it's interesting seeing all the evolutions that happened all at one time. It was just really crazy. And even having a conversation with him, I said, here we are as two men in our 50s at this point. He just turned 60. But he said, I asked him, I said, how does it feel to A, be a part of that time frame, and then B, to be the creator of something that started off as an accident, as a 12-year-old kid, that in this day and age and time, they have these huge competitions built around something you stumbled on. I said, I couldn't imagine that legacy, being that person to discover something and then have the world go crazy over it. So, these moments were all incredible from A to Z.
Another cool thing about this, I mean, it's a 50-year-old art form now, or at least we celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. Mm-hmm. Very much a youth culture. I mean, these were all teenagers. These were high school kids at the time. So a lot of these pioneers are still with us because they were so young at the time this was happening.
Absolutely. And a point I was going to make also with that, and I apologize, was to your point about Grandmaster Flash using the breaks and the different things. I always explain to my students to understand your assignment. And the reason why I say that is because every audience is different. So now in today's culture, they do a lot of what we call quick mixing. They'll play like the very beginning of the song, the intro, the first verse, and by the first chorus, they're mixing out, they're transitioning. So you got about 1 minute and 30 seconds of a record, maybe 2 minutes tops. I'm saying that to say that if you do that with the wrong audience, your response is going to be very, very different. So when it went back to the times of Grandmaster Flash, what he was doing was he was taking songs that were personal to people and he was cutting out the sections that they really enjoyed, which is the reason why he caught flack. Because to this day, if you play for an older Black audience, and we're going to use the song that Pounce brought up, when you bring up Before I Let Go, there are certain parts that people wait for and anticipate. It's no different than You Shook Me. If you don't get to the very, very end of You Shook Me, that very last note, the crowd is going to look at you crazy. Trust me, it happened to me. I accidentally had a version that cut off the very last note, and people turned and looked at me. And I'm going to tell you, it's one of those moments you feel about, 2.5 inches tall. And that might have been tall.
I've been there. I've been there.
Because
it's one of those things
are
where
so ingrained in our total body memory.
Absolutely.
It just feels
yes, there's a certain closeness to it. So, when we go back to Grandmaster Flash doing what he was doing, people are looking at him with the side eye like, bruh, what are you doing? You're messing up the whole thing. So it was a new thing that was really hard to conceptualize. Now, if you're DJing in this current time, like I do, I go to these high schools and I'm out here killing big shows with like 800 to 1,000 students at a time. You play a song a little too long and they're starting to look at you like, come on, dude, next song.
Microwave era, baby. We're in the microwave era.
Yep.
Yeah, everything's on demand.
Pounce, you got some more stories from the clubs?
Yeah. Well, I think especially today, kind of in this very, very new era, and Avalanche, I'm sure you know about it. Is I'm a fairly new DJ in terms of like spinning in clubs. I've probably been doing it for like 4 years now, if you will. I started off doing more so just KJing, and then during the pandemic, I had a big homie who basically taught me how to mix, and I kind of took it from there. But I think now in today's era, the stems have like sort of changed the game. Because with the stems, you basically have the four elements of, you have the bass, the melody, you have the vocals, and I'm missing one. What am I? And the drums. The drums. And so now, for one, I think it's great. It makes it very easy to mix records. It's probably not as respected from the DJs of Avalanche's era, but for me, y'all get busy with the stems too.
All day. I was first on board.
Yeah. But now, especially with the vocals in particular, like I play around a lot with like taking the vocals out and kind of making things more like participatory, if you will, because if you know it's a sing-along and everybody knows the words to the song, you can kind of bring it in with the vocals, and then maybe once you get out of the verse and into the hook, you can kind of just let everybody sing the hook together. And it's created for like a really cool vibe in a lot of these rooms, because now people feel even more, outside of them just liking the music and dancing to the music and moving to the music, they feel a part of like singing along to the music as well. And it's almost like the room becomes a choir, which it's pretty interesting, because you got a bunch of people that can't sing, but if we all can just hang on to this note here and you get enough people singing this song, like it works out, and it really kind of creates a different kind of vibe in rooms that I think has helped tremendously. And stems are like, what, maybe a year, no more than 2 years old, Avalanche?
December of last year.
Yeah. So very new. Very new thing. Yeah, December. Yeah. I think of 2022 maybe. So it's pretty new. It's pretty new, but I think it's changed the game, and it's helped me a lot in my DJing.
So, Pounce, you referenced four elements. I want to talk about the use of the terminology hip hop and rap. I mean, what is rap? What is hip hop? Are they interchangeable? Blah blah blah. So in '81, I don't think anybody's really using hip hop as a description of the music, but I think you mentioned African Bambaataa, one of the pioneers. He came out with Planet Rock in '82. I think he's the first one to really apply hip hop in general to the culture, and he considered there to be four elements of hip hop culture. That would be MCing, DJing, and then b-boying, which is the dance element, break dancing. B-boy
and graffiti.
B-boy refers to break boy, and of course, hip hop is based on the breaks from these old records. So that's where the term comes from. And then, Pounce, graffiti. So, Pounce, we'll stick with you here as you're coming up as a youngster. How many elements of this hip hop culture were you immersed in?
I would say more so 2 of the 4 for me. I think hip hop dancing has come a long way from sort of, the b-boy will always be traditional, but that's not really what you see anymore. When you go to hip hop clubs, hip hop events, unless you are kind of at a traditional space or a space that's really honoring the traditions of hip hop. I think it's evolved so much. Graffiti is still around, of course, but I still think that's even
what
more
I'd
so
seen no
element.
graffiti in Portland. What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's still a thing. Right. It's still a thing, of course, but like it's not something that I would say like my generation is like big on. But the DJing and the MCing is still a huge part of today's hip hop that the younger generation is, my generation and beyond is sort of coming up on, and those two elements are still really huge. Like I said, the dancing just looks a lot different, and I do think in some ways the graffiti has become a little bit of a lost art as the generations go by.
Mark, did you get into any tagging or b-boying when you were a youngster?
Well, first off, I want to say they've always said 4 elements. I believe that there are 6 elements.
Okay.
And I say that because
interesting.
What I feel like they left out is fashion.
Yep.
And then barbering. When you start talking about haircuts,
I like it.
And clothing, these are all huge parts of the urban culture. And if you listen to every song, they talk about how fresh I am. I got on some of the best gear, I got a fade, or back in the early days, we had jerry curls, whatever. Judge not. But I feel like those 2 elements get left out. You got people like Dapper Dan, who was super huge in the hip hop community for styling people, putting out certain pieces, who is now working with Gucci, I think, in this day and age. So I think that's left out. And then you look at the hairstyles have always been big. I mean, I had cornrows in 81, before people were really into that,
I tend to agree with that a lot, actually. And I never thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. But as I kind of talk about the 2 elements that I feel like are kind of being pushed further and further out, I think those 2 elements are the ones that are very prevalent still in today's hip hop culture.
Absolutely. And it never goes away. So when you start talking about it, and we start talking about the hip hop elements, if I add in the other 2, I was definitely involved in all of that. The only one that I can't say that I was involved in is the graffiti part. I can't draw stick people. This is horrible.
Yeah, me neither. I can't get with it.
It's a bad situation, but all the elements are still alive. I mean, I just saw an article of an LA building like 3 days ago, and they were talking about every level had graffiti on it. I don't know if anybody saw that, but it's still real obvious and relevant. But the problem with it is that particular form is one that's looked down on the most because it's not looked at as something that is beautiful to everyone. A lot of people look at it like, that's terrible. And what I think should happen, in my opinion, is there should be certain art spaces where people can go and do that in certain parts of the city. And hopefully that would help, A, keep the culture, but B, keep other areas still beautiful and make it so that people are able to express themselves and there's not all this tension. So I don't want to dive too far into that, but I was a big hip hop head. I used to break dance. I was in a couple of the biggest breakdance groups in Illinois, and we had some major battles. We were well known. And then I used to rap. That's kind of how my pen got formed, is doing rap songs. And don't ask me to rap because I don't do that no more. But
same. I've been there. I had my day too, Avalanche. I had my day too.
But that has allowed me to work with and produce rappers because I was in bands and in choirs since 9 and 10. But also being a former rapper, I understand the cadence and the flow. So in fact, you can see on the back up above, it says Conscious Ave, and that's one of my rap groups. We got stuff on all platforms. People always ask, like, how do you know how to do this? And I'm like, this is my culture. Like, I started day one with this, and I used to recite every lyric. In fact, people used to challenge me, and they would start saying, a lyric, and then I would finish the whole verse, and it was just that way. And I had to learn to eventually break out of that because as a writer, I didn't want to plagiarize anybody else's songs. So then I started purposely forgetting people's lyrics just so that I wouldn't write something so close. Because when we start talking about rap, dude, I was in there. I mean, I knew every line to The Message. I knew every line to Sugar Hill Gang, their song. I started getting deeper into like Dr. Ice. I'm sure a lot of people don't know that, but I knew every lyric because I was so into it. All I had to have is one note, doop, and then I would finish it. That was my thing. So yeah, I was into all of it. And then eventually at 13, I got into DJing, and that's where I stayed. DJing has been my thing. So, here I am literally 40 years deep with this, and at 19 I got into radio, and so it's been real for me. So yeah, I've been a part of everything except for graffiti.
All right, we got DJ Avalanche and Devon Pouncey helping us break down hip hop here. I want to bring Cheryl back in. Now, obviously, a big element of hip hop music is the art of sampling, taking a piece of music or a snippet of music, recontextualizing it, adding new beats to it and new lyrics. And a song comes out in 1981 that would be sampled to major effect by a somewhat controversial figure in the rap game in the early 90s, Vanilla Ice. Mm-hmm. That song is Under Pressure by David Bowie and Queen, and that's, Cheryl, a song you're adding to the playlist for this year.
Yeah, and I am adding the David Bowie Queen version, Under Pressure. I will not be adding the Vanilla Ice.
No, we're going to pass on that
one. I can tell you that much when we get there. But it does bring up a good point about sampling, and there's actually 2 songs that came out in 1991 that sampled songs from 1981. One is Ice Ice Baby. The other one is MC Hammer, You Can't Touch This.
Oh, yeah.
Rick James, Super Freak, which also came out in 1981. But I will say that one of the things that I do find interesting about sampling is going original, the songs that they used. There's a lot of music that was brought to people's attention through the sampling in hip hop, and that people would not have known about if it weren't for that.
You already brought one to our attention on the podcast, a huge one, which is the Incredible Bongo Band's Apache, with Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon on the late Jim Gordon on the drums. We did a special episode honoring him, and that's an incredible track that has been sampled countless times. One of the most popular beats in all of hip hop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this song, Queen was in their studio in Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, recording what would become the Hot Space album that came out in 1982. And David Bowie was in the studio at the same time. He was recording the theme song to the movie Cat People. And so they had been kind of hanging out together, and then they were talking about trying to do something together. And so they actually did have the song. It was actually called Feel Like originally, and it was a Roger Taylor song, who's the drummer. And they weren't really able to get that song going in a way that they liked it. And then so they brought David Bowie in, and he and Freddie started bouncing ideas off each other. Bowie's the one that came up with the claps and the snaps at the beginning. And he and Freddie were kind of going back and forth with just ad-libbing a lot of the vocals. And that's where like that scat kind of at the beginning originated from. And the story goes that they were in the booth separately recording without hearing each other. So Freddie would sing his lines, and then David would come in and sing his lines. And apparently Freddie was just like amazed by how well David's parts were fitting in with his, and come to find out that David was actually listening in the hallway on his, which to Freddie's annoyance. But now, when this song was originally written, it didn't have 2 key elements. One was David Bowie, and 2 was that bass line. So the bass line actually came later, and there is some disagreement about, some confusion maybe about who actually created the bass line.
And that's the big hook in Ice Ice Baby, is that dum da da dum da da dum 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 da da dum da da dum dum. That iconic bass line.
Yeah, and John Deacon, the bass player, everybody else says that he's the one that came up with the bass line except him. He claims that David Bowie came up with it. But David Bowie is on record saying no. Apparently, as the story goes, John was, came up with the bass line, and then they all went out and like had pizza or something and came back, and he couldn't remember it. And supposedly Roger Taylor says that he remembered it. But then you get the Brian Mays account, and he says, no, actually it was David Bowie who remembered it. And he changed it from da 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 to da 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 da. So have the note go down at the end. So anyway, now they've got that bass line, which is the hook. And David really kind of took over, and he became more and more passionate about the song and had a vision for what he wanted the song to become.
David Bowie never really did much in his own recordings in a hip hop vein, but he was definitely on the scene early on once these rap artists started playing downtown, he was there, as he always seems to be, at the cutting edge of every artistic development during his career. Also, I think Queen had some cred in that community with Another One Bites the Dust, which had come out the year before. That's a record that you could spin at one of these house parties and not get dirty looks. Because that had a chic groove to it.
Oh yeah. Well, and one of the things I also wanted to bring up is, you look at rap today, and it's very different than its roots in that the beginnings all had live instrumentation. It was all samples.
Right.
That's how rap started. It was samples of live instrumentation. So one of the things that Cheryl had brought up and I thought was really good was that when you listen to a sample, whether you're talking about Vanilla Ice or whatever, which I'm going to give them credit for that because they helped break down a lot of doors along with Hammer as far as budgets were concerned and the reach and this and that. Hammer was the one that really did it, but the timing and everything just really helped. But, you look at the way things were sampled. Again, being an artist, I wasn't much of a sampler. And I started trying it to see how people could kind of manipulate something and come up with something so good. A lot of people either liked or didn't like sampling. But if you really broke it down and you listened to the parts of the songs that were being sampled and how they were being reintroduced, it was brilliant. It was really brilliant.
That was the thing that excited me most about the genre, was taking these samples and recontextualize. The ultimate example for me, the one that blew my mind, was Brand Nubian when they sampled Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. What I Am. Just a brilliant sample.
Agreed. One of my favorite ones of all time, and I always credit this guy, is Just Blaze. He took a song that was not only so big once, but it was so big at least twice. And that was Rick James, Super Freak. When you had Super Freak, it was a monster hit itself. Then you had Hammer that came out and then took it to another level. But Just Blaze took that same sample for Jay-Z, and the way that he chopped it and played it back, in my opinion, was probably one of the most brilliant ones I'd heard, because it gave you the feeling of, I've been here before, but this is different, and I think that that's where the creativity is really crazy. And pretty much on a daily basis right now, I'm working with some samples and changing things, and I can see how complex this art form is. When you look at people like the Ninth Wonders and even the Kanye West, even though he's gone off the rails, but if you go back to his early samples, he took some amazing soul samples and made some great songs for some great people. And so being able to dive into that mindset and just try to see, how did you hear that? Out of this entire song, the song is great, but you found this piece and what you did with it, it's different. So we got to give credit to that. And like I said, at the end of the day, the roots of hip hop all go back to sampling and utilizing live instrumentation. When you started getting into that 81, 82 era, that's when it began to change, because people like Africa Bambaataa coming out with Planet Rock, that also was the third branch off of something which became electro. You started getting a lot of electro sounds at that point in time.
And he was sampling Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk was huge. I loved all that. I was big into that. So you started getting that, and you started getting into Electric Kingdom and a lot of different things that originated from here, but was an emulation of those same things that Cheryl just brought up.
Well, I think the thing with Vanilla Ice is that initially he was denying that he was even sampling that song, because he says that he changed the bass line from da 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 to da 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 da. He added one
beat
note in there, one beat in there, and so there was a lot of backlash about that. And he did then admit, okay, yes, I am sampling Queen, and give credit. Now, I'm not saying that he's not changing it and manipulating and making it something his own too, but it's just that
one note
is not really enough to take away that credit.
And let's get to the root of that. The reason why that one note existed was because in the early days of sampling, your sample rates and ability was so limited. In order to get the whole loop so that it sounded on beat, you had to tap it again. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that right now, just by, I had samplers back then, and your sample size was so small, you couldn't get that whole thing in there to make it make sense. So you had to go dun 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 dun. You just kind of hit it again to keep it in sync.
Yeah.
And then by the time you tapped it the second time, it was back on the one count. There you go. So
all right, Pounce got to bounce, so we want to get him back in here to wrap things up. So before we let you go, Devon, let's get your favorite song from 1981, and then a song or two contemporary that you got to spin when you're out in the club these days, or people aren't going to go home happy.
Ooh, well, I'm gonna go with Before I Let Go with Maze.
So this is Frankie Beverly and Maze.
Frankie Beverly and Maze. That's one of my favorite old school bands. Again, of course, me being born in 1993, I can only go off of what Pops exposed me to in those earlier days of life. And that band was certainly one of, like I said, I like EWF. I like, I'm related to Sly and the Family Stone. A lot I like from them, of course, as well. But Maze, Frankie Beverly and Maze is definitely one of those bands that I just think top to bottom, just sonically, they were.
And this is a bit. I'll interrupt you briefly here. Frankie Beverly and Maze, really big in the black community and black radio. Never crossed over to pop. Never.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I appreciate that, actually, on some levels. They might not so much from a business standpoint, but I definitely a black barbecue jam for sure is Before I Let Go. And even today, which has actually become a song that I guess segueing, we're talking about sampling that you can kind of play in the clubs, is Beyonce's Homecoming version of Before I Let Go. Works really, really well in the clubs today. It became one of those sort of TikTok phenomenons with the dance that goes along with it. And it obviously directly samples that song. And then another club banger. That's an interesting ask. But I would have to go with Meek Mill, Dreams and Nightmares. Whenever you kind of feel like you need to go into anthem mode, Meek Mill, Dreams and Nightmares is one of those songs that you can definitely lean on still today. That gives you that anthem feel. Again, that can get everybody participating with wanting to sing the song. It has a crazy build up. In the beginning, it's more so just kind of lyrics and melody, and then he kind of turns up when the beat drops as well. So I would say Dreams and Nightmares is another one that will always work in the club today.
Well, Pounce, we appreciate you joining us today. I know you got to get going. And
I loved it. I was soaking up game like a beach towel over here.
Well, he even got this big talk. I like it.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's go. Sprinkle me, man.
That's right.
All right, thanks, Pounce. Before we get off 1981, so Blondie has Rapture that comes out. Deborah Harry ends up hosting SNL in it was actually Valentine's Day, 1981, February 14th. So not only does she perform on the show, they bring in a rap group to perform on live network television for the first time in the United States. That group was Funky 4 plus one more.
Plus one.
And their big song in 1981, That's the Joint. Now, this was sampled a lot in hip-hop in the coming years, but it's a fun party song. It's long. It's about 9.5 minutes, but a lot of these old hip-hop songs were long. They went on for a long time. But what makes them interesting, and what makes the early days of hip-hop interesting, you got women involved from the jump. You had, Sugar Hill Records, where Sylvia Robinson is, the head honcho, a woman. And then after the Sugar Hill Gang comes out, one of the first acts they signed after that is The Sequence. Now, you can debate whether or not their music is very worthy, but it is a group of women out of Columbia, South Carolina. Now, Funky 4 plus one more, you got 5 rappers. One of them is Sha Rock. She's the one more. So
Yeah.
I guess you could quibble about the name of the group. It's like, is she not really part of it? Is she kind of just?
I was like, why did you have the
I
one?
know.
Why did you exclude her?
Why isn't it just the Funky Five? But I, but it, you know, I think it's the rhyme. It works. The Funky Four plus one more. You know, it's clever. But
yeah.
But that's the joint. It's cool. I mean, this is one of the great early hip hop tracks for sure.
No doubt. There was so much at that time frame. And let's not forget, when we talk about the song that I picked, I tried to stay with the rap. I could have gone R&B, I could have gone all kinds of things, but let's not forget one of the biggest ones is the Tom Tom Club.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Genius
of Love.
Mm-hmm.
Man, what a record.
That record has such longevity too. Like you still hear it, you hear it in commercials now, it's been sampled so many times and it's still everywhere.
And again, that's a spin. They're a spin-off of Talking Heads. It's the rhythm section from the Talking Heads. Tina Weymouth, Chris France. They're a married couple, bass and drums. And then, so we talked about Remain in Light, their 1980 album, in our final 1980 episode. Cheryl's husband, Mike, chose a track, Once in a Lifetime, off that record. But you can hear elements of rap on that album. David Byrne is, I can't remember which track it is exactly, but Facts Are This, Facts Are That. That's a rap on that.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about Same As It Ever Was. I mean, just the way that he is, his style has a very hip-hoppy, rappy kind of feel to it.
And that came from studying like preachers and, evangelists. And like, that's where he got that from. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which I think, when we get into this conversation about the influence of rap, rap has always been about the culture, what is going on in your community. So all things at the end of the day are influencing what comes out musically. So whether it's like Cheryl said, the preachers and pastors, I mean, we all know that Black culture was really big with going to church and this and that. And, so a lot of those things have all been very, very influential in hip hop, which has been influenced by earlier days of R&B, which was influenced by gospel. It's all one big ball. Like I said earlier, you're just getting pieces of that ball.
But you have a different hip hop track from 81 that you wanted to put forward?
I just, I wanted to go with Apache just because such a fun song, as you guys brought up earlier, the sample of that, coming from the incredible bongo band. It just, to this day, we actually played it at a remix game last week. As soon as it came on, me and the other DJ, it's a buddy of mine, we're standing there, we looked at each other and we both went, we did the whole dance and the crowd is just kind of getting into it and kind of responding to it. I mean, you know what it is when you hear it come on. It doesn't matter if it's their version, whether you're talking about our Seattle friends or Mix-a-Lot's version. I mean, it's just fun. It gives you that vibe and that feeling. So I went with that one, but it was really kind of tough because there's a lot of things that happened in that time frame. I mean, we could go into another very, very influential artist and DJ producer. And that gentleman went by Little Starsky, who was Lovebug Starsky, the writer and producer for Salt and Pepper. He was the guy that did all their music, wrote their lyrics and everything. And, he had one called Dancing Party People, and that was in 81. So, I mean, there's a lot, just depended on where you were and what you had access to at that time. Matt brought up the fact that it was really hard to hear things on radio, but I remember we would have people that would go to different parts of the country and bring back cassettes, and that's how we learned.
That's how I got into hip hop, was hearing a cassette of NWA before they came out with their record. A friend of mine brought back a cassette recording that he had of the Dope Man and that stuff that was on the NWA and the Posse album. That was a real mind blower.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm going to take this moment to say this just because of what we're talking about and what you brought up. When you start talking about the reach of artists and particularly rap music at that time frame, the only way to get it was through these situations. Music stores weren't carrying them. We already talked about radio, especially Black radio, had shunned it, this, that, and the other. The way that rap grew was on the streets. and it was more hand to hand. And when you think about the time frame and the way that people like NWA sold 1 million copies without any radio and that independent hustle and grind, it really makes you take a look at today's times when we have everything at our fingertips, but yet our musicians are broke. Think about that for a moment. When you really had to work hard to get that song to someone in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or somewhere remote in Washington, yet they were getting the music, and these people were living and starting to gain money, making $10,000 on something, which that was big money at that time. When you look at today's time, especially an artist like myself, I mean, I put that project out myself and it got 16,000 spins. I was excited. I saw probably $600. So, but I look at it and I say, why is it, even in today's current situation, when you talk about rap, I think a lot of things have been pretty interesting. When we go back and we talk about this time frame of the early 80s, I think we'd be remiss without talking about Rick Rubin.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Rubin really was brilliant in that early stages of rap. I mean, when you went from the time frame of having all these sampled songs that we were used to him coming out with these guitar hits from rock and turning those into big hip hop records, that took a whole new life. Those things ended up taking Run DMC to the places that they had gone. That was the house that LL Cool J built with all his stuff, and you go back and you listen to what Rick Rubin was doing and the way that he evolved where rap was at that time frame to what it became in that section of the 80s. That was a big deal. And they built Def Jam.
Brought it to a completely different audience that would have never been part of that.
Absolutely.
About that.
And that's where we started to understand the relationship a little bit. If you were really into music, you started to understand the relationship between rock and rap. Because the thing about rap was a lot of rockers in the beginning were like, oh, I don't like that. It's crap. They're sampling, da-da-da-da-da. But then you started to get this evolution and they started seeing, well, wait a minute. It has the same energy. It's aggressive. There's this vibe to it. And then all of a sudden, people started coming around. Yes, they did the whole, walk this way thing. But I think even after that, it took some other things for them to really understand that aggressive nature. And part of that process is kind of going towards what Matt brought up earlier, was NWA. They started seeing that this was a group that was very into a revolutionary type thing. Like, hey, this has got to change. We're fighting for something real here. We're not just talking about how fresh I am like it was in the very early days. Now it's gotten into the Public Enemies and the different things, which all were on the backs of the message.
That's when I got on board.
It was very rebellious, and a lot of people like that. And to this day, that aggressiveness, when you, again, Matt brought up a really good point of the influence of like dub and this and that. When you go back and you start looking at different songs along the way, things evolved so much to where you wouldn't have dubstep without rap, without dub itself and reggae and all that. These are all fusions of what dubstep is. It's that same aggressive nature as rap, that bang, bang. You're hearing those rock guitars and sounds now morphed into a different vibe. And so some people hate the evolution of things. I embrace it. I'm really big in a lot of this, and it's exciting to see where it goes next. And that's always been what urban culture has always been like. When you go back to who was the godfather of rock and roll, I mean, here's a guy that was like, I didn't like what was going on, so I decided to try. So once it got to a certain point and everybody started getting on board, urban culture started saying, all right, now we're on to the next thing. Everybody's here. And then it went into funk. And then it went into all the other different elements that brought us to this day, which those things are being sampled still.
Yeah.
So the development is incredible. It all makes sense. And I always say to people when I'm DJing, I'll mix different genres. And I'm like, music's music. Music's music. You've got the same notes on the keyboard or on the guitar. It's what you do with it, so it's all relative. It makes sense.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank DJ Avalanche and Devon Bouncy for joining us today to share their personal experiences with hip hop music and their faves. For Mark, it is Apache by Sugar Hill Gang. Pounce picked Frankie Beverly and Maze. What's the song title of that? It's I don't know my Maze.
Before
I let go.
Yeah.
So we're gonna add that to the playlist, and I'm gonna get down with Frankie Beverly and Maze. I'm picking Rapture by Blondie, and Cheryl's first choice for 1981, Queen and David Bowie's Under Pressure. Mark, Pounce, thanks for joining us, and thank you all for joining us on Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
And we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.